want you to stop whatever you are doing right now, just for a second, and play a very quick, seemingly simple game with me.
Ooh, I like this one.
Yeah, it's a good one. So I want you to think about your life right now, exactly as it is today, in this very moment. And I want you to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10.
Okay.
1 means you are in a place where you just want to pull the covers over your head and stay in bed all day long. 10 means you feel like an absolute superhero. You are firing on all cylinders. Go ahead, take a second, pick your number.
Got it.
You got it. Hold it in your mind. Okay, now here is the massive catch to this game. You are not allowed to choose the number 7.
And just like that, you can literally feel the air get sucked right out of the room.
Right.
It is such a brilliant, deeply uncomfortable constraint to place on someone. Because when you take the number 7 off the table, you suddenly, well, you strip away the most convenient, culturally acceptable hiding place we've built for ourselves.
It really does completely change the entire framing of the question. Because if we are being totally honest, most of us instinctively gravitate toward a 7 when anyone asks how we are doing.
Exactly.
But taking that away is actually the foundational premise of today's deep dive. We are pulling from a really fascinating, highly unusual set of source materials today.
Yeah, this stack is incredibly unique.
It really is. What we have are transcripts from an English learning audio series, specifically published in the year 2026. This was a curriculum designed entirely for A2 to B1 language learners.
So for those who aren't familiar with those exact metrics, we are talking about beginner to intermediate English students.
Right.
People who are just trying to get a grasp on basic conversational fluency.
But as we went through these transcripts, something incredible emerged. Disguised within these relatively simple vocabulary and grammar lessons is a profoundly deep, ruthlessly practical, multi-step psychological framework for engineering a personal comeback.
Which, makes perfect sense when you analyze the constraints of the medium itself.
How so?
Well, because this source material is designed specifically for non-native language learners, the authors couldn't rely on complicated academic jargon. They couldn't hide behind dense psychological terminology.
That's a great point.
They were forced to explain incredibly complex human emotional states using foundational elemental vocabulary and really vivid metaphors. And what happens when you strip away the academic noise is that you are left with this striking clarity of thought.
Absolutely. And our mission for this deep dive is to extract that hidden wisdom. We are going to unpack the mechanics of self-diagnosis as laid out in these transcripts. We're going to examine the very real, often invisible dangers of comfort.
The comfort trap.
Exactly. And ultimately, we are going to reconstruct the gritty, highly realistic action plan for personal growth that the authors just sort of embedded into these lessons.
And that brings the focus right back to you, the listener. We all have an area of our lives where we feel stalled.
Yeah, everybody does.
Maybe you're prepping for a massive career pivot and feeling paralyzed by the risk. Maybe you have been trying to break a stubborn bad habit for years. Or maybe you're just someone who is deeply fascinated by the architecture of self-improvement frameworks.
Whatever your baseline is, this discussion is meant to act as a mirror. We are going to use the linguistic tools from these 2026 transcripts to help you identify exactly where you are standing, and more importantly, how to push past that very seductive illusion that everything in your life is just fine.
So let's return to that uncomfortable number game we started with, because this forms the core of our first major concept, the anatomy of a diagnosis.
The rules of this framework are laid out with absolute surgical precision in our source material. The scale is 1 to 10. The extremes are clearly defined, so there's really no ambiguity at all.
Right, so a 1 is a state of total paralysis, wanting to stay in bed all day, representing a profound lack of motivation, energy, or hope.
And a 10 is that elusive superhero state, representing peak performance, total alignment, and fulfillment. And then comes the crucial non-negotiable rule. The number 7 is strictly forbidden.
Now, the text uses a very specific vocabulary word to anchor this exercise. It uses the word diagnosis.
Diagnosis?
Yes. It defines diagnosis simply as the act of identifying a problem or a situation. In the context of this framework, the number you choose is not just a feeling, It is your life diagnosis. It is your clinical starting point.
Because logically, you cannot engineer a comeback. You can't fix a systemic problem until you have accurately identified and diagnosed the current reality of the situation.
Exactly.
I really want to dwell on that word choice for a moment.
Yeah,
Diagnosis. It feels so clinical, so objective.
it does.
It removes the morality from the equation entirely. Like, if you take your car to a mechanic and they diagnose a bad transmission, they aren't telling you that your car is morally corrupt or evil.
Right, they're not judging the car.
No. They are just identifying the mechanical failure that prevents it from moving forward. The authors of this language course are asking the student to look at their own life with that exact same emotional detachment.
We really have to look at why they chose to ban the number 7. Why is 7 the ultimate enemy of this diagnostic process?
Yeah, that's the big question.
The text explicitly labels the number 7 as the comfort trap. It calls 7 the lazy answer, the safe answer. Choosing 7 translates culturally to saying, oh, I'm fine, thanks.
Which is the universal default response to literally any inquiry about our well-being. How are you? I'm fine.
Always. But let's analyze the psychological shield that claiming a 7 actually provides. A 7 is a masterclass in cognitive dissonance.
Okay, unpack that a little bit.
It's a number that is just high enough that you don't feel like a total failure.
Yeah.
You could point to your job, your apartment, your basic routines and say, look, things are okay. But simultaneously, 7 is just low enough that you do not feel the agonizing pressure to actively push for more.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You don't have to take risks if you are a 7. It is the numerical equivalent of treading water in a lukewarm pool.
The lukewarm pool, that's exactly it. The source text points out that when you claim a 7, your life isn't terrible, but you also aren't really growing. It's a camouflage that allows people to avoid the harsh, terrifying reality of their own stagnation.
Which makes me wonder how many people listening right now are sitting at a 7 and desperately trying to convince themselves they are actually an 8.
I would guess a lot of people, because by completely removing the option of 7, this framework forces a deeply uncomfortable reckoning. It demands that you take a side.
You have to.
You have to decide if you are actually a 6, which the text defines as meaning something in your life fundamentally needs to change, or if you are an 8, which means you are actively thriving and winning. There is no middle ground allowed whatsoever. You are either in a state of required change or a state of active momentum.
And taking away that middle ground is terrifying because it forces accountability. If you admit you are a 6, the immediate follow-up question your brain asks is, okay, so what are you going to do about it?
Right.
The 7 protects you from that exact question. By shattering that shield, the game forces the individual to confront their own dissatisfaction.
And the material doesn't just leave you there, which I love. It goes into some incredible illustrative detail about the specific states that exist below that forbidden 7.
Let's look at the state of being a 5.
Yeah, the source describes being a 5 with one very potent word: drifting.
Drifting.
The metaphor they use here is so vivid and universally understood. They describe a person at a 5 as being like a boat in the middle of a vast ocean with absolutely no engine.
No engine at all.
You are just going wherever the wind happens to blow you. You are moving, sure, but you have no plan. The text specifically mentions not having a plan for your physical health or your intellectual learning. You are just existing in motion without any intentional direction.
Let's expand on the physics of that metaphor because it is incredibly revealing. A boat without an engine is not necessarily stationary. It might be moving quite fast if the current is strong.
Oh, that's a huge point.
And I think this is where so many people misdiagnose their own lives. We equate movement with progress.
Yes, exactly.
You might be incredibly busy at your job, answering hundreds of emails, attending back-to-back meetings, essentially moving at 50 knots. But if you have no engine, meaning you have no internal drive, no long-term vision, no intentionality behind that movement, you are still just a 5. You are drifting.
You're just being pushed by the corporate wind.
Exactly. You are entirely at the mercy of your environment. If the wind blows toward a storm of layoffs, you go into the storm. If the economic wind dies down, you sit completely still. When a person genuinely diagnoses themselves as a 5, they are admitting a profound lack of agency.
The text actually humorously mentions having a job and having coffee as basic survival, but being entirely devoid of intentional, self-directed momentum. It is a highly vulnerable, passive existence completely disguised as normalcy.
That is a fascinating distinction.
Yeah.
The idea that you can be exhausted from moving so fast, but still fundamentally be drifting because you aren't steering the boat.
I think a lot of high achievers actually use a state of drifting to mask their own burnout.
Oh, absolutely.
They just let the calendar dictate their lives so they don't have to make any hard decisions.
Right.
But then the text contrasts that drifting state with the state of being a six. Now, a six is described with a different vocabulary word, waiting.
Really. Right.
So a six is marginally better than a five because in this state, the engine actually exists. There are big dreams. The text gives examples from the perspective of its learners, like wanting to write a novel or wanting to travel more extensively. The intention is absolutely there. The desire is palpable, but the person is completely paralyzed.
And why are they paralyzed? Because they are waiting for the perfect time.
The perfect time. Which brings us to a massive psychological roadblock, the illusion of the perfect condition. The text highlights the exact insidious phrases we use to justify our position when we are trapped in a six.
Like what?
Things like, I will start that project when I have more money, or I will finally commit to learning this language when I am less busy at work.
But the harsh truth revealed in the source material, which they state as an absolute fact, is that you are always going to be busy.
Always.
The perfect time is a complete myth. It is a fairy tale we tell ourselves to soothe the anxiety of inaction. So while the 5 is drifting without a destination in mind, the 6 has a beautiful destination plotted on the map. They have their hands on the wheel, but they refuse to pull up the anchor until the weather forecast is absolutely flawless.
Which, as any sailor will tell you, it never is.
Never.
I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, though.
Go for it.
Isn't there a danger in moving before you are ready? I mean, isn't waiting sometimes a highly strategic decision? If I want to start a business, but I literally have $0 in my bank account, waiting until I have a safety net seems less like a paralyzing illusion and more like basic financial survival. How does the framework reconcile that?
It's a really valid pushback.
Yeah.
But the framework distinguishes between active preparation and passive waiting.
Okay, what's the difference?
If you are actively saving money every single week to build that safety net, you're not a 6, you're an 8 in the domain of financial preparation. You have an engine, and it is running. The state of waiting that the text warns against is passive. It is the belief that the external circumstances will magically align without your intervention.
Ah, I see.
It is the person who says, I'll start when things slow down, but does literally nothing to actually clear their schedule. The text argues that the friction of starting will always be there. Waiting for the friction to disappear entirely is just another form of self-deception.
That makes total sense. It is the difference between actively building a bridge and just sitting on the riverbank hoping the water dries up on its own.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for someone sitting there listening to this and having this sudden, unpleasant realization that they are a 5 or a 6?
Well, the text says it plainly. This realization, this discomfort, is exactly why you need a comeback. The honest diagnosis is the painful but necessary first step.
But this bridges us into a massive paradox, and it forms the entire focus of the next section of the framework. If we have done the hard introspective work, if we have brutally diagnosed ourselves as a 5 or a 6, and we know with absolute burning certainty that we want to be an 8 or a 9,
Right.
why is it so incredibly hard to actually make the move? What is the invisible force holding us back?
That might be the defining question of human behavior and personal growth. And the source material tackles this not with complex neuroscience, but by introducing a very powerful, highly descriptive vocabulary word, complacent.
Complacent?
The text defines complacent as being so satisfied with things exactly as they are that you completely stop trying to improve. Complacency is the gravitational pull that keeps you stuck at a 5 or a 6. You aren't miserable enough to be forced into an emergency action, but you certainly aren't fulfilled enough to be thriving.
The metaphor the source uses to describe the state of complacency is arguably the most relatable image in the entire series. It calls complacency the warm bed on a cold Monday morning.
Oh, that is so good.
Right. I want you to really think about that specific feeling. Feel the texture of that moment. The alarm goes off. You know you should get up. You know you made a grand plan the night before to go to the gym or to study for your certification or to finally work on that big creative project.
But the blankets...
So the blankets are just so incredibly warm, and you know the air outside the bed is freezing cold. The text refers to these as your life blankets, and these life blankets represent the baseline comforts of your existence.
Let's really analyze what constitutes a life blanket in the modern world. Because the text details these baseline comforts beautifully. It is a job that pays just enough of the bills so you aren't facing eviction. It's having a relatively safe place to live. It's having skills like basic conversational language skills in the context of the original learners that are simply good enough to get by without extreme embarrassment.
Good enough.
Yeah. These things are comfortable. They're the warm blankets that wrap around us. And this leads to the absolute paradox of the comfort trap, which the text articulates with stunning simplicity. It explicitly states that when you are comfortable, nothing is on fire.
Right. And if we look at that on the surface, having nothing on fire sounds like the ultimate goal. It sounds like the very definition of peace and stability. Why would anyone want their life to be on fire?
Exactly.
But the danger, as the source so astutely points out, is that if nothing is burning, you don't run.
You don't run.
There is no urgency. There is no biological imperative to move. There's no predator chasing you, so your brain says, conserve energy. Stay under the blankets. And here's where the text elevates from a simple language lesson to a profound philosophical statement. It says that if there is no fire, there is also no light, there is no passion, and there is no heat. You aren't thriving. You are merely surviving in the dark.
Surviving in the dark. That phrase carries so much weight, it perfectly captures the quiet tragedy of the comfort trap. You are existing. You are mathematically alive.
Mathematically alive. Wait.
You are safe from immediate catastrophic harm, but you are completely devoid of the light and the heat that comes from actual friction-filled growth and forward momentum. You are choosing the absence of pain over the presence of joy. And if we synthesize what the text argues next, we can see how this prolonged state of comfort fundamentally warps our entire perception of risk.
Let's explore that warped perception, because the text notes that the longer you stay wrapped in these life blankets, the longer you stay in this trap, the more terrified you become of the outside world.
Yeah.
Because you have acclimated so entirely to the safety and the specific temperature of the warm bed, anything that exists outside of that confined space starts to look not just cold, but actively hostile.
Precisely. Your risk perception becomes entirely distorted by your isolation. When you remain complacent for long enough, your brain's baseline for what constitutes a threat shifts dramatically. You begin to view any change, even obviously positive change, like pursuing a promotion, learning a new skill, or ending a mediocre relationship, as a massive danger rather than a necessary opportunity.
It's all just cold air.
Exactly. The outside world is cold, it is unpredictable, and it is uncomfortable. Therefore, the human brain, which is evolutionarily wired to prioritize immediate safety over long-term self-actualization, works overtime to convince you that staying in the warm bed is not just a comfortable choice, but an absolutely necessary one for your survival. The comfort trap effectively brainwashes you into believing that trying and failing is infinitely more dangerous than simply never trying at all.
That fear of the cold air outside the blanket is so universally powerful. We can all identify an area of our lives where we are choosing the dark, warm bed over the bright, cold reality outside.
Definitely.
But what happens when you finally muster the courage to kick off the blankets? What happens when you step outside, face the cold air, and immediately fall flat on your face? Because that is the reality the authors tackle next.
Right, because it's rarely a smooth exit.
Never. We've established that the comfort trap keeps us paralyzed. But the next massive mental hurdle outlined in the source material is the fear of failure, and more specifically, how we linguistically and emotionally define that failure. The text introduces a specific phrase here to describe that moment of falling down, falling short.
Falling short is defined in the source quite literally as not reaching the desired goal you set for yourself. It is the objective gap between what you intended to do when you got out of bed and what you actually managed to achieve. And what is vital to understand here is that the text immediately links this concept of falling short to a very specific, highly intense emotional state. To describe this state, it introduces the vocabulary word devastated.
And the authors make a very clear, deliberate distinction here regarding the intensity of that word. Devastated is not just a synonym for being sad or disappointed. The text defines devastated as feeling completely empty or broken inside.
It is a profound, visceral reaction.
When you fall short, when you miss the mark on something you finally tried to achieve, you don't just feel a little bummed out, you feel devastated.
We really need to pause and analyze why that devastation is so uniquely dangerous to a comeback. Why do we react so extremely to simply missing a target? It's because we have attached our fundamental identity and our self-worth to the outcome. The text explains that this feeling of devastation immediately creates a highly toxic internal narrative. When you experience that feeling of being broken or empty because you didn't reach your goal, you start to internalize a story about who you are as a person. The specific example given in the source is the learner telling themselves, I am not good enough, I am fundamentally incapable. I should just stay at my number 5.
It is the ultimate self-justified retreat right back to the comfort trap.
Just
The fear of experiencing that devastating empty feeling again is so strong that it acts as a physical force, driving people right back under the warm blankets. You
yeah.
poke your head out, you try something new, you fall short, you feel empty, and your brain instantly validates its own anxiety. It says, see, I told you it was dangerous out there. You got hurt. Get back in the bed where it is safe.
Exactly. The fear of devastation becomes a perfectly closed, self-fulfilling loop of stagnation. You try, you fail, you hurt, you retreat, you stagnate. But this is exactly where the source material introduces a radical philosophical mindset shift. It counters this toxic loop by introducing the concept of falling forward. This single concept fundamentally redefines the entire architecture of what a mistake actually is.
I have to say, the analogy the text uses to illustrate this is one of the most elegant spatial metaphors I've ever encountered in self-improvement material.
It really is.
It says, imagine you are running down a path toward a finish line. If you trip over a rock and you fall forward, your face might hit the dirt, you might scrape your knees, but physically, geographically, you are closer to the finish line than you were when you started running.
Right.
It completely reframes the mechanics of a mistake. Tripping up isn't a step backward. It is a clumsy, painful step forward, but it is undeniably still forward momentum.
It's brilliant because it removes the emotion and relies strictly on physics. By falling forward, the text argues that making a mistake means you are actively gathering data. You are learning the terrain. You learned where the rock was so you won't trip over it next time. To ground this in reality, the source uses the very specific, practical example that would resonate deeply with its original audience of language learners.
The 20 minutes example.
Yes, it describes the scenario of a student attempting to speak English for 20 solid minutes with a native speaker.
Which is a daunting task for a beginner. And in the example provided, the person attempts the conversation, gets completely overwhelmed and scared after just 2 minutes, and abruptly stops. They give up and walk away. Now, under the old traditional definition of failure, this is a catastrophic example of falling short.
Completely.
The stated goal was 20 minutes. The stark reality was 2 minutes. Cue the intense devastation. Cue the internal toxic story of, I am not good enough, I will never learn this language, I should just stick to my native tongue.
But watch what happens when we apply the falling forward framework to that exact same scenario. The physical outcome hasn't changed. It was still only 2 minutes. But the interpretation changes entirely. Those 2 minutes are no longer viewed as evidence of brokenness or incapacity. They are viewed as a critical lesson.
They are data.
Yes, they are viewed as 2 actual minutes of uncomfortable real-world practice that you absolutely did not have yesterday. The text emphasizes that by taking this action, by securing those 2 minutes, you are actively breaking the comfort trap. You are breaking it because you actively chose to be uncomfortable.
But let me challenge this because I can hear the skeptics listening right now. Isn't this just a cute semantic trick?
How do you mean?
Isn't falling forward just a rebranding of toxic positivity? If I blow a massive presentation at work after preparing for 5 minutes instead of 5 hours, I haven't fallen forward, I've just failed, and I might get fired. How does the text reconcile the reality of severe consequences with this idea of falling forward?
It is a really crucial distinction to make. The text is not advocating for reckless behavior or celebrating failure for the sake of failure. Toxic positivity demands that you feel happy about failing.
Right.
The falling forward concept does not require you to be happy. You can still be frustrated that you only lasted 2 minutes. You can be angry that you tripped. What the concept does is prevent the failure from calcifying into an identity. It stops the failure from devastating you to the point where you retreat to the bed.
I see the difference.
If you blew the presentation, falling forward means analyzing exactly why you blew it, lack of preparation, and incorporating that harsh data into the next attempt. It is a strictly utilitarian approach to failure. You are extracting the value from the mistake, even if the mistake was painful. You are choosing the cold air over the warm blanket, even if your first step out of bed results in a sprained ankle.
That makes a lot of sense. You're choosing the discomfort of the 2 minutes because, logically, it is the only physical way to eventually build the capacity for 20 minutes. It is a highly pragmatic, liberating way to view our own struggles.
Exactly.
But of course, as anyone who has read a self-help book knows, just having a new mindset isn't enough. A philosophical shift without execution is just daydreaming. We need a way to actually implement this. We need a granular action plan. And that bleeds perfectly into the next segment of our deep dive, where the source material pivots from the philosophical to the incredibly strategic.
The first pillar of this practical action plan hinges on a very specific behavioral concept, which the authors introduce via two contrasting vocabulary words: anticipate and willpower.
Okay, let's break those down.
The text defines anticipate as the ability to see a problem before it actually happens and actively prepare for it.
Okay.
And it defines willpower as the internal ability to control your own thoughts and actions in order to achieve a difficult goal.
And here's where the text essentially looks the reader in the eye and calls out our collective delusion. It asserts that as human beings, we often falsely believe our willpower is an infinite, unbreakable resource.
We really do.
We sit around on a Sunday afternoon, feeling rested, and we make these grand, sweeping, heroic plans about how disciplined we are going to be on Monday. But the reality, as the text bluntly points out, is that our willpower is exceptionally weak, almost non-existent, when we are tired.
This is a profound insight that mirrors modern behavioral economics. We constantly pit our ideal, fully rested, highly caffeinated selves against challenges that our exhausted, end-of-the-day selves will actually have to face. The fundamental mismatch of resources.
The scenario the text uses to illustrate this is painfully universally relatable. It uses the example of a student planning to do their language study at 8 p.m. right after a long, grueling day of work. The text calls this exact plan a losing battle.
A completely losing battle.
Because when 8 p.m. actually rolls around, you don't want to conjugate verbs, you don't want to engage in deep cognitive work. All you want to do is order a pizza, collapse on the couch, and watch movies. Your willpower tank isn't just low, it is completely empty.
If we extrapolate on this, traditional, old-school self-improvement advice would tell you that you just need to push harder. It would tell you to discipline yourself, to grind it out, to force yourself to study at 8 p.m. despite being utterly exhausted. It frames the failure to study as a moral failing.
Like you're just a bad, lazy person.
Exactly. But the strategic pivot suggested by this 2026 source material is entirely different and, frankly, much more humane. It says, do not fight your own tiredness. It is a biological reality. If you fight it, you will lose. Instead, anticipate it, prepare for it.
I love this because it completely removes the guilt and shame from the equation. It shifts the battlefield entirely. The text suggests that instead of fighting a losing battle against yourself at 8 p.m., you should shift that required 10 minutes of effort to the morning when you are having your first cup of coffee. Or it suggests doing it during your daily commute on the train. You logically accept that your 8 p.m. self is a compromised version of you who is going to eat pizza and watch movies. You don't judge that version of yourself. You just maneuver around it. You make sure your morning self gets the critical work done before the willpower tank drains.
To solidify this concept, the text connects it to a wonderfully simple, intuitive weather analogy. Anticipating your own personal weakness like knowing with absolute certainty that you will be exhausted at night is exactly like checking the weather forecast in the morning. If you look at the forecast and you anticipate a heavy rainstorm at 5 p.m., you don't stand outside at 5 p.m. and try to use your sheer willpower to stop the rain from falling on you.
No, that would be ridiculous.
You simply bring an umbrella when you leave the house.
That is the perfect distillation of the concept. You don't try to stop the rain. You bring an umbrella. You don't try to stop being a tired human being after an 8-hour workday. You move your most important goals to the morning. It is just clean, unemotional strategy. Okay, so that is the first part of the action plan, strategic anticipation. Bypass the willpower trap entirely. But this framework anticipates the next hurdle, too.
There's always another hurdle.
Right. What happens when you are putting in the work? You're doing your 10 minutes in the morning, you are falling forward, you are avoiding the 8 p.m. trap, but you look around and you just feel like absolutely nothing is happening. You feel completely stagnant despite the effort.
That phenomenon leads us directly to the second pillar of the action plan. The authors address this by focusing on a psychological illusion. They describe using the vocabulary word obscure. The source defines obscure as hiding something or making it incredibly hard to see.
Like a magic trick.
Kind of, yeah. To illustrate this, they use the visual metaphor of a thick cloud covering the sun. The sun is still there. It hasn't vanished. It is still burning and shining just as brightly, but its light is temporarily blocked from your view. You cannot see the reality of the sun because of the interference of the cloud.
And the text doesn't leave us guessing as to what that cloud is. It identifies exactly what acts as the obscuring force in our modern lives. fear and comparison. These are the twin forces that completely obscure our view of our own progress. The source gives a very modern, highly specific example of this trap.
The YouTube example.
Yes, it talks about the danger of looking at people who are absolutely intimidatingly perfect at what they do. In the context of these specific language learners, the example is spending hours watching flawless, incredibly charismatic native English speakers on YouTube.
This touches on a highly prevalent, almost unavoidable issue in the digital age. We are constantly exposed to the absolute apex of human achievement in every single domain.
Every time you open your phone.
Exactly. When you are putting in your daily, messy, imperfect 2-minute effort in the morning, and then you immediately pull out your phone and compare that raw effort to the highly polished, edited, flawless end product of someone else on the internet, your own small progress becomes completely obscured. It vanishes from your perception. You look at their perfection, you look at your clumsy mistakes, and the text notes that this devastating comparison creates the powerful illusion that you are standing entirely still.
It makes you feel like all that morning effort, all that strategic anticipation is for nothing. You think, why am I even trying to climb this mountain when that person is effortlessly flying a helicopter over it?
Exactly.
But the text doesn't just diagnose this digital age problem. It gives us a brilliant, highly practical, mathematical metric for defeating this illusion. It tells the learner to completely aggressively stop looking at other people, total tunnel vision. Instead, it argues that the only true, valid measurement of a comeback is to look at yourself, and only yourself, exactly 1 year ago.
It is a radical, necessary shift in your point of reference. The source states a very clear rule for knowing if you are succeeding. You know you are making progress when you realize that your bad day right now, a day where you feel clumsy, unmotivated, and frustrated, is actually objectively better than your absolute best good day was exactly 12 months ago.
That's incredible.
This is how you unobscure your growth. You actively remove the thick cloud of external internet-fueled comparison, and you force yourself to focus entirely on your own historical baseline.
That is such a powerful, undeniable metric. It bypasses emotion entirely. If your worst performance today beats your absolute best performance from last year, that is undeniable, physical proof of momentum. The sun is shining, even if you couldn't see it a moment ago.
Yep.
So if we step back and look at the framework so far, we've diagnosed our state, we've recognized the comfort trap of the warm bed, we've learned to fall forward, we've strategically bypassed our weak willpower, and we've learned to unobscure our growth by comparing ourselves strictly to our past selves.
A really solid foundation.
It works wonderfully for the listener who realized they were a drifting 5 or a waiting 6. But we have to ask the hard, uncomfortable question to round this out. What about the listener who is sitting lower than a 5? What about the person listening to this who feels like their life diagnosis isn't a 6 or a 5 or even a 2? What about the person who feels like they are at a complete, devastating 0?
The source material does not shy away from this at all. It addresses this absolute lowest state head-on in its final segment. It introduces a concept that is universally understood but rarely analyzed with this level of stark realism: rock bottom.
Rock bottom.
The text defines rock bottom quite literally as the lowest possible point a human being can reach. It uses incredibly evocative, heavy language to describe this specific state, calling it dark, crushing, and characterized by having absolutely zero ambient energy.
It gives some pretty heavy examples, too.
It does. It grounds this by giving severe life examples, like the sudden loss of a career you loved or the painful ending of a foundational relationship.
It is a state of total structural collapse. The house hasn't just caught fire, it is burned completely to the ground. And the text introduces a very specific English idiom for how you get out of this state. It doesn't say you jump out, it doesn't say you climb out, it says you must claw your way back.
The word claw is doing an immense amount of heavy lifting in this section. The authors are using it to emphasize a stark, brutal truth about recovery. You cannot simply jump out of rock bottom.
There's no shortcut.
There is no hidden trampoline at the bottom of the pit that will magically bounce you back to a 7 or an 8. The recovery process from a true 0 requires an immense, almost unimaginable amount of sustained effort and struggle.
The imagery the source provides here paints a vivid, incredibly gritty picture. It describes the act of clawing your way back as being trapped at the bottom of a deep, dark dirt hole. You don't have a ladder, you don't have a rope. You have to use your bare fingers and your nails to dig into the dirt walls and pull your entire body weight up, moving just one excruciating inch at a time.
It's a very visceral image.
The text explicitly warns the learner that this process is not pretty. It is not cinematic, it is inherently messy, it is painful, and it is ugly.
And this is where the text's grounding in simple, everyday vocabulary becomes its greatest strength. It provides incredibly granular, specific examples of what that clawing actually looks like in daily life. Because when you are at rock bottom, you aren't thinking about grand five-year plans.
No, you're just trying to get through the day.
Exactly. It isn't about cinematic moments of triumph with soaring background music. It's about the smallest possible increments of survival. The source says clawing your way back means doing the dishes and cleaning your kitchen counter when you feel profoundly, paralyzingly sad. It means forcing yourself to write just one single sentence of that project when every fiber of your physical being wants to quit entirely and go back to sleep.
That is the unglamorous reality of a comeback from zero. It is a series of small, ugly, exhausting, seemingly insignificant steps. You drag yourself out of bed, you clean the kitchen counter, you make a cup of coffee, and that is a victory. That is you clawing 1 inch up the dirt wall. It feels pathetic compared to where you used to be, but it is an inch of upward movement.
And to bring this entire psychological framework to its grand conclusion, the text introduces a final majestic metaphor to contrast with that gritty, dirt under the fingernails reality.
The phoenix.
Yes, the mythological bird that bursts into flames, burns completely to ash, and is then reborn from those very same ashes. The text suggests a powerful mechanism here. By taking these small, ugly, desperate actions, cleaning the kitchen, writing the single sentence, practicing the language for 2 painful minutes, you are slowly accumulating inches. Eventually, those inches reach a critical mass, allowing you to rise from the ashes.
The old version of you, the version that was trapped at rock bottom, the version that was devastated by failure, literally burns away in the friction of the climb. And the new version, which the text explicitly describes as stronger, thicker-skinned, and wiser, stands up out of the dirt.
That's the real comeback.
The ultimate lesson the authors leave us with is that a true comeback is never a sudden, magical miracle. It is never a lightning bolt of inspiration. It is simply one small, gritty action today, followed stubbornly by another small action tomorrow, and another the day after that.
It is the relentless, compounding interest of small, forward movements that is the only way the phoenix actually rises.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. We have covered an immense amount of ground, extracting these hidden truths from what looked like a simple stack of language lessons. We started by brutally diagnosing our current state, refusing the comfort of the number 7 to find out if we are merely drifting without an engine or paralyzing ourselves by waiting for the perfect weather.
We exposed the seductive warm bed of the comfort trap and realized that surviving in the dark is not a substitute for actually living.
We fundamentally redefined failure as falling forward, understanding that physically tripping means we are undeniably closer to the finish line. We learned to anticipate our own failing willpower rather than fighting it, shifting our efforts to match our biological energy.
We learned to unobscure our progress by shutting out the internet and comparing our current bad days solely to our past good days.
And finally, we looked at the terrifying reality of rock bottom, embracing the messy, inch-by-inch, dirt under the fingernails reality of clawing our way back to eventually rise from the ashes.
And this leads directly to a challenge for you, the listener. The source material ends with a direct call to action for its students, and we are extending that exact same challenge to you right now in your own life. What is your one small action for this week? Look at the massive framework we just unpacked together. Which phase of this 2026 comeback are you currently sitting in?
Are you still in the uncomfortable diagnosis phase?
Are you actively fighting the gravity of the comfort trap? Are you trying to learn how to fall forward without feeling devastated? Identify your exact phase, and then identify the one small, perhaps ugly, deeply unglamorous step you can take today to claw 1 inch upward.
Because that is exactly how the real comeback starts, not with a leap, but with an inch. And I want to leave you with one final lingering question to ponder on your own as you go about the rest of your day, maybe while you are commuting or making dinner. We established right at the beginning that the number 7 is the ultimate comfort trap because it safely masks our lack of growth.
It is the perfect socially acceptable camouflage for deep complacency.
Exactly. So look around your daily life with a critical eye. Look at your daily routines, your relationships, your health habits, your career trajectory, the things you have quietly accepted as good enough. What other safe metrics, acceptable routines, or comfortably average habits in your life are secretly functioning as your own personal sevens? Think about it. We will see you next time.